There will be times where we'll be working with outside consultants or working on older projects when we'll need to leverage information from CAD drawing files. In order to be able to best do this in Revit, I usually like to create a drafting view to insert in that CAD information into. Now, technically, we can insert this CAD information into our first floor or second floor floor plans if we wanted to be able to draw over the top of it. But by inserting this into our drafting view, we can reutilize this information again and again and again in future projects. So let's go ahead and create a drafting view to put our CAD information inside of. So come up here to View, and we're going to create a new drafting view. Now the name we're going to give this drafting view is going to be Linked, or actually, let's not call it Linked Detail, even though we are kind of bringing the detail in. Let's just call this Inserted Detail. And then click on OK. Right now, to the scale of 1.5 inches equals a foot, we can always adjust that after the fact, so that's not a big deal for us. And let's go ahead and import in, or in this case, come up here to Insert and import CAD file to bring that CAD detail into our view. So move over here to Truss, select on truss.dwg. Now we have a couple different options that we can do. The first is we can preserve the colors, or we can make this black and white. I haven't found anybody yet that would want to revert the colors so that blue was no longer blue, but that is an option as well. Sometimes if I'm going to be doing the work, I'll make it be black and white, but the majority of the time I just like to leave it as the original CAD colors by clicking on Preserve. As far as positioning is concerned, oftentimes I'll just do center to center if I'm working on a detail, because the exact location where it gets inserted in at inside of a drafting view just doesn't matter. But if the exact location of this drawing file does matter, perhaps we want to be able to draw on top of someone's existing floor plan, and then we want to be able to export it out back into CAD so that they can easily put our work over the top of theirs, or origin to origin would be a better option to choose at that time. But in this case, we're just going to go ahead and do Auto Center to Center and click on Open to This. And we can see it just automatically placed this truss detail into our drawing area. So let's go ahead and zoom down into this. We can select on it, and if we select on it, we'll see that the entire thing highlights in a blue color. Now what this means is this is very much like inserting a block from AutoCAD into an AutoCAD environment, except in this case we've inserted the CAD file directly into the Revit environment, and it's all still one piece. Now the good thing about this being all one piece is it means we can move it around and do whatever we need to with it. Also, by the fact that we imported this CAD file in, it's now native inside of Revit, which means that if anything change would happen to the CAD file, if it got moved, if any details changed to the CAD file, that information won't change inside of the Revit environment. So that's an advantage because it's going to be very project specific. Another advantage to being able to bring this information into a drafting view is the fact that if we decide to select on it, we'll notice that there's a couple of different options up here. And by having this line work inside of the drafting view, if we decided to come up here and choose this option of Explode, we wouldn't have line work just all over our model in different locations, because that's what the Explode button does. It would convert this into individual pieces and line work. By having it inside of a drafting view, if we explode it, all the line work's just going to be contained here, two-dimensionally, and it'll be very easy to select and modify and make changes to it. Now, we keep talking about Explode, so I'm going to go ahead and move up here and click on the Explode button. And there's an option here for either partial explode or full explode. I highly recommend to never do a full explode. If you do a full explode, it'll explode everything inside of that view that you just brought in, including if there is any AutoCAD blocks or hatch patterns. Any of that kind of information will now be individual pieces and lines. It's very much, if you're used to AutoCAD and you decide to use the explode command 14 times on an object, so that things like concrete patterns, every little line that makes up the concrete symbology was individual lines, that's exactly what would happen with the full explode command here inside of Revit. So I always use the partial explode command, and by using partial explode, if we had any hatch patterns in here, for the most part, they would stay one entity, make them much easier to be able to make modifications to. Also, things like the text that we have here, it's going to stay as one entity. It's not going to sort of explode into maybe symbols or whatever the case may be. But the bad thing is, though, is that if we select on this text after doing an explode, At one point, this was multi-line text inside of AutoCAD, which means this was all typed at the same time, and if you would click on one letter, everything would move at once. After exploding inside of Revit, it's now individual pieces and lines. If we look here, such things as the arrowheads, this is just a filled region now. It's not even an AutoCAD arrowhead anymore. Point being is that even though we only did a partial explode, this is now a lot of just individual pieces and parts, and it might be a little bit difficult to go through and clean this up. So as a result of that, oftentimes I don't recommend doing explodes, even though it might save you a little bit work early on because you'll have your line work right there. Because if you decide to do an explode, you get lots of little pieces and parts, and it's going to take you a while to select all the appropriate objects. The other thing that's going to be bad about this, and if you do an explode, is it automatically doubles the size of the original detail that you brought into Revit. So if this has been a 0.5 meg detail and you explode it, it suddenly becomes a 1 meg detail inside of Revit. If you only have one, it's not a big deal. But if you have 50 of them or 100 of them and you bring them all into Revit at the same time, suddenly instead of having 50 megs worth of information, you might have 100 megs worth of information inside of your Revit file. And if you do that, it's going to make your drawing file less stable. It's also going to make it a little bit slower for Revit to process the model as you're spinning and doing different things. So as a result of that, I usually don't recommend just coming in and just using the pure import and then explode on these entities to be able to make modifications to them. Instead, I usually recommend doing linking, which we'll be talking in another video in this section about, because by linking them in instead of exploding, we can make drawings and changes a little bit quicker and cleaner than by using the import CAD method.